So this chapter is called Our Disruptions, Disturbances and Disasters, which I keep forgetting for some reason. So adding a few points from a new chapter called Our Dynamic Risk Landscape, which again has data from after the last publication of the first edition. So we are looking at total fertility and human development index in 2019, where each dot is a country, color signifies region, and size indicates population size. The main point, of course, is if you look at human development index versus babies per woman. Sorry, my eyes are getting worse. Maybe I have cataract. But anyway, so babies per woman obviously drops off as human development index increases, which is not expected, and you see the global inlay here. Higher fertility rates and higher populations are in places like the Middle East, China, Eastern Europe, India, and South Asia, Southeast Asia, which is not surprising. Higher fertility rates are here in Africa and lower HDI as well. So India and China and so on are moving towards higher HDI. Population has peaked in China. India's fertility rate is dropping, but it has still a long way to go in terms of the total population. So it's not new, but it's new data related to what we already said. Total fertility expected for between 2025 and 2030 as a projection. This is the medium variant projection, so not average. So you have total fertility here going from 6 to 6.5 and down to less than 1.5. So once you drop below 2.1, you are below replacement rate, and as expected, the fertility rates for the next 5 years or 6 years, it's going to be below replacement in many places, the rich countries. Surprisingly, even in countries like Brazil and Argentina and so on, the fertility rates teeter on the edge of replacement. Africa remains high. India is getting towards replacement rate. China is already below, and they are working hard to motivate women to have children, paying them a lot of money. Similarly, South Korea is having lots of population, new births, and so on and so forth. Japan, of course, has been a poster child for how modernization and educating women and income for them and unchanging male attitudes lead women to not get married, not have children, and population, literally beginning to collapse, and so on and so forth. So this is a new projection that was produced in 2019 by the UN Demographics Agency. So I just wanted to show it again. The top 10 cities we already looked at of the world in terms of population over 1500 to 1950. We had looked at 1500, 1800, 1900, 1950, and 2010. This table has 2020. This is from the United Nations 2019 report, so I just wanted to include it. In 2020, Tokyo was on top, Delhi, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Dhaka, Cairo, Beijing, Mumbai, and Osaka. So something is always missing for me here, because in China, typically the biggest cities in terms of population are not Shanghai and Beijing, but most of the lists tend to have Shanghai and Beijing in the top 10. So I don't know how these things get counted. So just keep that in mind. But keep again in mind that urbanization and urban populations will keep growing even as populations keep dropping in many places like China. So urbanization is almost independent. It's more related to people wanting to live in cities plus financial or employment opportunities, economic opportunities, and so on that are better in urban centers. Urban population in terms of percent of total and location and size of cities in 2018. So again, data from more recent after the book was published. So here again, percentage of urban, and this is 1 million to 3 million. You have 5 to 10 million, and these are percentages here in terms of urban population, so 80 to 100 and 0 to 20 in the lighter colors. Basically, you see what you expect: New York City, Boston, and Seattle, and LA, and so on and so forth, and all the big cities you can think of in terms of cities with 10 million or more being these reddish colors here: Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Kolkata, and New Delhi, and so on and so forth, and of course China. Again, see, I don't know if these big cities with greater than 10 million are consistent with this table here, so I'm always a bit suspicious about that. And Japan, of course, has Tokyo, and who else? Some other city, Osaka, shows up here as well. Okay, so not surprising, but this is a more recent data, so I wanted to show it. And if you look at income per person and life expectancy in 1800 versus 2021, where each dot is a country, color signifies region, and size indicates population size. Obviously, we were clumped around here in terms of the global map for income and life expectancy. So India and China were doing remarkably well in 1800. Industrial revolution, colonization, and so on affected them very differently. So if you now look at income and life expectancy, we have jumped up and spread over much larger range here, going from this income. You have to look up how they are reported. I can't read my own figures because I zoomed in, and you can, but the numbers don't really matter. The main thing is the trend of how life expectancy is dependent on income, but not so much. So the life expectancy range is here, and the income range is much larger than the life expectancy range. So even poor countries are having increasing life expectancies and reduced infant mortalities, and so on and so forth. So this is a schematic showing our globalized world and the processes behind it, which we had seen this as a prop before in the last edition of the book. So here we'll read 1 to 4. Extensification of political, economic, and social activities across national and regional borders. So those are the globalized world and the processes behind. Intensification of connections and flows of trade, finance, and migration. So we talked about how life has become complex, complicated, and stressed, and rapid, accelerated, and so on. So acceleration of the dissemination of people, goods, and ideas is happening because of globalization, and increasing interdependence across space and scale. So as I'm recording this last week or about 2 weeks ago, a ship crashed into the Key State Bridge or State Key Bridge in Baltimore, closed down a port, and had repercussions for economies quite widely across the globe. So interdependencies are pretty strong, and terrorism continues to be part of the dynamic risk landscape, and surprisingly it's coming to very safe and small towns across Europe, which had never imagined terrorism being a part of their lives. But here is Maastricht in the Netherlands putting up terrorism protections after some experiences that left them scarred. Okay, so there are no winners in a nuclear war, so this is part of the dynamic risk, and this discussion keeps going on. War for humans and by humans. So it's a kind of a cynical take on the situation, but nuclear weapons are all around. There are negotiations, and there are agreements and conventions on nuclear weapons, but there are rogue players, and there are people who threaten the use of nuclear weapons, like Putin, as a, whether he's just using that as a threat to hold off Western aid to Ukraine, or whether he's crazy enough to do something. And of course we have Kim Jong-un always doing crazy things, and we don't know who's behind Kim Jong-un and what his goal is, and so on. So we have to keep all these things in mind when we think about our dynamic risk landscape. But I just wanted to include this at the end of this chapter to show some of the more recent data. Okay, so we'll move to the next section. We are still in part 1 here on state of our world. Okay, so I'll come back and meet in the next podcast.